Wall Street Journal has a story by Greg Ip, an American labor market mystery. The United States has really led Europe for a very long time on employment, on labor, on business economy, job growth, and the like, and yet we've fallen behind on labor participation. The Labor Department reported Friday the U.S. labor force participation rate was 62.6% in January, compared with 61.9% in December. Now, labor force participation rate is how many people in the economy who could work do work. The share of the population between ages 15 and 64. Where could they be? Between the fourth quarters of 2019 and 2021, the labor force participation rate dropped 0.7% in the U.S., while rising in Japan and Canada, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The Eurozone participation rate was also well above its pre-pandemic level in the third quarter. While much of the decline is because of retirement in the United States, the 25 to 54-year-old participation rate in labor has fallen more than in other countries. Why? Also, inflation is now higher in the United States than in other countries. These things appear to be related. And it has two things having to do with a public policy. So inflation has a lot to do with government spending, but our labor force participation rate does as well. We did something that Europe and Japan decided not to do. We separated workers from their jobs. Now, I know at the time that this was happening, the left was very hysterical about it, but I do believe they will be honest and admit it now. In this country, the program the United States decided to deploy was twofold. One was the Paycheck Protection Act, PPP, where you could get a loan from your business, from the government for your business, for the amount of money your employees needed, what their salaries would be. And as long as you did not change your salaries for a number of months or years, I think it was, you would not have to pay back the loan. It would become a government grant to you to prop up your payroll. At a time, everything was shut down. But what the government also did is the government subsidized unemployment such that people were getting additional money from the federal government for being unemployed. Now, what did that do? The stories are legion and legend. Employers found their employees angry with them for getting PPP. Employers found that if they got into the Paycheck Protection Program, their employees were furious. Why? Because in very many cases in the United States, if an employee took unemployment, given the generous unemployment benefits the federal government was paying, they could make more money on unemployment than their current salary with their employer. So if the employer got PPP and didn't lay off the employees actually got paid less than if they went on unemployment. And so a lot of employers wound up either giving the money back or not going through with PPP. And then what happened is those employees out of the workforce, many of them started setting aside some of the extra money that they didn't need so they could stay on unemployment longer. They could stay out of work longer and not have to find a job. And in some cases, those people realized, particularly in a lot of cases, working parents realized, hey, you know what? One of us could stay home with the kids. We don't need to go back to work. Europe and much of Asia, particularly Japan, did something different. In Europe and in Japan, instead of doing the unemployment benefits the United States did, in Europe and Japan, governments just took over the payrolls of companies. They furloughed employees. And they told employees, look, you're going to be furloughed. You're going to be set out of work, but you're still going to get your salary. And the government wound up paying the payroll to the companies. and the companies kept paying their employees. So the employee relationship to the employer was no longer severed. Because the employer and the employee relationship never went away, when it was time to go back to work, the employees could go back to work at their existing job. They never left employment altogether and so had no reason to go find new jobs. In the United States, we severed the bond between employee and employer. And as a result, a lot of people on the unemployment line, when it was time to go look for work again, decided to go look elsewhere. Now, it's not all COVID, although COVID had a lot to do with it and the policies we developed around COVID. In some cases, people have died. In some cases, people decided to retire early. And in some cases, people are scared to go back to work because of COVID. We still have the Chicken Littles out there who are scared the sky is still falling. They don't want to go back to work, and they're making ends meet. They're doing what they can on minimal pay so they don't have to go back to work. But the biggest issue, the most important issue, is that our government policies affected the unemployment situation. And now as people are going back to work, companies are having to pay way more money to induce them to come into the market. And the result is that inflation is going up as well. And inflation goes up because prices go up. Prices go up because you gotta keep up with what people want to be able to work. The wage rate is an incentive to get you in to get a job. And if it's too low, if it's $7.50 and everybody else out there is paying $20 an hour, you got to get to $20 an hour just to be considered. But the problem is that inflation is more than just wages. It's other things as well. And here's Joe Biden's economic advisor talking about this morning.
At this point, we have seen strong wage growth, but, wage growth is not keeping pace with inflation. And the president has been very focused on making sure that this recovery works for all workers. He likes to talk about building an economy from the middle out. And, certainly wage gains are an important piece of that puzzle. But we want to see that strong, sustained wage gains over time. And we do need to be concerned about, whether or not there is any indications that is affecting inflation. And again, that is the Fed's job. But let me remind you that, so far they are not keeping pace with inflation.
Yes, wages are not keeping pace with inflation. So you get paid an extra $20 an hour, but inflation is still causing you to feel like you're taking home less and less. That's a problem. And it's a problem that the Biden administration itself has to some degree incentivized here. And it's a problem that the left has no answer for. The left has been making their case for MMT, modern monetary theory. And modern monetary theory means that the government can just print more money to pay for more progressive agenda items and we won't get inflation. The New York Times has a story out today. Is this what winning looks like? Modern monetary theory, the buzziest economic idea in decades, got a pandemic tryouts of sorts. Now inflation is testing its limits. It sounds like Gina Smolik at the New York Times was writing skeptically on MMT, but the headline writers make it sound like she's in praise of it. She's not really. MMT has been embraced by progressive activists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stephanie Kelton is probably the big proponent of it. She's the face of modern monetary theory. Here's how the New York Times describes it. Modern monetary theory posits that if a government controls its own currency and needs money, it can just print it as long as its economy has the ability to churn out the needed goods and services. In the MMT view of the world, how will you pay for it is a vapid policy question. Real-world resources and political priorities determine how much lawmakers can and should spend. It's an idea that was forged and put to something of a test during a low-inflation era. Stephanie Kelton published a book, The Deficit Myth, in 2020 and shot onto the bestseller list. inflation had been weak for decades, had dropped below 1% as consumers retrenched in the pandemic. The government began to spend rapidly to prop up failing households, and guess what? Inflation bounced back. And now it's over 7%. And government spending is partly to blame for it. And the modern monetary theorists, they can't accept the blame. So Larry Summers, you know who Larry Summers is? Larry Summers is one of the first liberals out there, an economist, worked for Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. He was the president of Harvard, and he said, hey, if you spend what you're spending, you're going to cause inflation. And everybody else said, no, Larry, you're out to date. We got modern monetary theory. It doesn't matter. We can spend as much as we want. We won't cause inflation. And behind the scenes, a lot of smart people in Washington took Larry Summers seriously, but they were scared of the wokes. They were scared of the squad. They were scared of the progressives in the White House who had bought into modern monetary theory. So they wouldn't speak up. And now all the things that Larry Summers said would come to bear have come to bear. And he's got a Twitter thread on modern monetary theory and why the New York Times shouldn't be treating it seriously or even skeptical. One of the problems he points out is that even Marxist scholars will do peer-reviewed economic analysis. And the modern monetary theorists refuse to do peer-reviewed journals explaining their points. It is incoherent. It cannot be explained. According to MMT, Michael Strain from the American Enterprise Institute puts this out. When aggregate demand drops, we need big deficits. But when the economy is suffering from too much demand, leading to inflation, we should not raise taxes. It's not coherent. Now, of course, modern monetary theorists say everything that's happened proves them correct. The problem is that they can't actually explain how it proves them correct, and yet the New York Times seems to be giving them a platform to advance it at a time where everyone who said the amount of government spending we've got out there would cause inflation has been proven right, and the modern monetary theorists have said all along, no, we need more spending, more spending, more spending. The reason we have so much unemployment right now, or not unemployment, but so many vacant jobs, is because so many people in government forgot basic economics. And not only did they forget basic economics, they decided to separate employees from employers by incentivizing unemployment, as opposed to doing what every other country on the planet did by and large, which was just to furlough employees, have the governments pay the salaries. That gave the workers incentive to go back to work at those companies without having to do sky-high wage hikes afterwards. The United States did not do that. And by the way, bipartisan problem, it started under Trump. It's not just a Biden thing. And that is why we have so many people in need of workers, and they can't find workers right now. And one of the chief reasons inflation is so high is because this country, in its COVID policies, subsidized unemployment and severed the relationship between employee and employer. And a lot of people, they're still too scared to go back to work because of government incompetence in handling COVID and telling people a vaccine would be the salve we needed. And in fact, people are still getting COVID.